You working out?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm putting in the
It's a spiritual gym, Shabbos morning. I got it.
They put it on the
I got it. Okay. All right. Everybody.
Yeah, we'll see. Thank you.
Oh, it's 15 minutes. Sorry. All right. Let's start. Caroline, can we put the tefillah onto the prayer up on the page? On the. Okay. Shall we? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher yishem v'tzivah v'tzivanu la'asot v'divrei Torah. כולנו יודעים שמלך ולמדי תורה דרך לשמה ברוך אתה אדוני ולמדי תורה לעמי ישראל. Okay. Let's look at the first pasuk in the book of Leviticus, which is the beginning of the third of the 5 books of Torah. We're looking at Vayikra, and its name Vayikra is from the very first word of the Sefer, of the book. And it's a strange word. Not only is the word strange in the phrase that it begins, because of, you'll see in a second, the redundancy of that, but also there's a very famous, strange element to the word, which we're going to look at. So we're going to look at that, the whole phrase and some of the meanings of that one word, and then one letter within that one word we're going to take a look at. So, thank you so much. Wow. You can order it, and it's like Vayikra Moshe. Vayikra Moshe Vayidaber Adonai Elav Me'ol Moed Le'emor. So, and he called to Moshe. Vayidaber, and God then spoke to him. Me'ol Moed Le'emor, from the tent of meeting, the tent of Moed, which is the appointed meeting times. Like Mo'adim are the Chagim, the holidays are Mo'adim, they're appointed meeting times. So God calls out to Moshe, or he called to Moshe, really, we don't know who called. Presumably it's connected to what came before. Remember, in our book, for us, the books are discontiguous, or they seem like, oh, there's a book, but like in the scroll, right, you have the paragraph that preceded it, which no one inside of the scroll said this is the end of the book. And there's no internal chapter headings, right? So whatever came right before is contiguous with what comes after, right? So it makes sense to kind of just begin with and he's untight, because if you want to know who the he is, go back a couple, one sentence above, and you'll find out who the he was. But it is odd. It's odd. It's not common. If you look at the rest of the Chumash, it's not common in every time that Moshe and God have a shmooze, God calls first and says, "Can you talk?" That's not the way it works, right? It seems like this is a unique Vayikra Moshe that he called Moshe. He called him and then he started speaking to him. But wait a second, why don't you start, if you look back at the other verses in Exodus, it's like God is speaking to Moshe and Hashem is saying, Vaydaber Adonai Moshe Lemor, he just speaks to him. There's no Kriya, there's no Vayikra Moshe, and he called to Moshe. It could also, by the way, just said Vayikra Elav, and he called to him, Vaydaber Adonai, Vaydaber Ito, and he spoke with him. It's just a very funny sentence, right? It's not like the most. It could have just begun. Also, if you look at the book of Bamidbar, if you look at the rest of the 4 books in which Moshe, the 4 books in which Moshe appears, it's very strange. And for sure, the rabbis noticed this. It's not like we're the only ones to notice it. The rabbis were very taken by this. We'll get to that in a moment. Okay. Also, Vayidaber Adonai Elav, and God spoke to him. Again, why Elav to him? I mean, again, you have to hear the way that the rabbis read the Torah is basically, the rabbis basically think that they're better editors than God, right? So the entire Midrashic tradition, and Midrash meaning like expansion, questions, additions, subtractions, all of that is rooted in a basic assumption of the rabbis, which is, if God is a really good writer, then the economy of language should have been much, much better, right? And so often when a sentence could have been written differently, the rabbis will often counterfactually say, wow, why is it written this way? I wouldn't have written it this way. Hemingway wouldn't have written it this way. Anybody else would have written it this way. But it's not a mistake. It must be that God was winking at us and saying, hey, look at how badly I wrote this sentence. Come and figure out why I wrote it this way.
Did you say how you think it could have been written?
Yeah. In other words, we started by saying the word Vayikra Moshe, the first word of the third book of Torah, which again, Leviticus, it has to do with the Kohanim and the Levites and the rules, and it's almost like a pause between the narrative pieces. Like Shemot is narrative, Bamidbar will be narrative. There'll be some narrative also in the book of Leviticus, but it's mostly like once we built this temple, this Mishkan, let's figure out now how to use it. That's basically what Leviticus is. It's like, we made a Mishkan, and here's the quick start guide. It's called Torah Kohanim. It's the laws of the priests, right? That's another name for the book of Leviticus. So the book of Leviticus begins with a very clunky, weird sentence by saying, and God called to Moshe and then spoke to him from the tent of meeting, right? Vayikra, it's like God called and then said, hey, can you speak now? Right? So it's very weird that there's a call and then there's a speech act. Also, why tell us that it's from Ohel Moed? All right,
it's new, so isn't this the new medium for speaking?
Right, so there is something new about this. It's from Ohel Moed. And in other places too, God speaks to Moshe from Sinai. But whenever the Torah tells us where God speaks to Moshe from, the rabbis seem to find that to be a bit superfluous. But you're right, that's going to be the answer. There's something unique about the Ohel Moed, and why Moshe is being spoken to from here that is midrashically exciting, midrashically nutritious. It's something that fills you. There's a teaching here, right? Okay, but let's go to the obvious problem in Vayikra, which is if you look at the Caroline, if you look up, so people can see there you go. The most obvious problem is not only in terms of the redundancy of the language or its clunkiness or whatever it is. There's just this scribal strangeness. Look at the word Vayikra itself. Now you can't read Hebrew. If you look at the very first word in the image lifted from the scroll itself, you'll see that there's a strange font problem. Right? There's an aleph there that's called an aleph ze'era. It's a small aleph. Right? You see that? Mm-hmm. Little aleph that it's like, me too! I want to be in here! It's like, what is that doing there? Interesting. We'll focus on that as we also make sense of the entire sentence, okay? So the first source to look at is the Mishnah Torah from the Rambam. Look at Maimonides. In his Hilchos, Mezuzah, Tefillin, and Sifrei Torah. So Hilchos, Tefillin, Mezuzah, and Sifrei Torah. Do you see it's the second source? You see it says, a scribe should pay careful attention. Do you see that? You should be careful with the big letters and also with the small letters. Uveosios and nekudos, and also the letters that have little dots on top of them. Right? The most famous of which is when Esav is kissing Jacob, they reconcile, there are these little scribal dots on the top of it, So you have to be careful here. The osios amshunos kigon hapein halufufos v'osios amu akumos k'moshitikos sofim ish ish. You have to be very careful with all of these transmitted scribal traditions, including letters that are written differently, the pei and the letter right there, different the letter pei and curved letters. All of those things should be adhered to. Right? So the Rambam in the 12th century is making sure that we know that the Sifrei Torah, every single thing in it is important. Okay? Don't just think what is that? Those things are now, once they've been we don't really know why they're there. I mean, we do. But maybe Rambam also didn't always know. But make sure that you keep it. So the Aleph Ze'era is something that's important to keep. Let's look at a couple of theories about why there are these small letters, okay? Okay, one, this is all non-midrashic, meaning just from a critical perspective. Why might there be a small letter there? How might that tradition have made its way into becoming sacred? Right? We can't change the Aleph. Don't change the Aleph, the Rambam says. Don't write a big Aleph. Okay, let's look at some critical reasons why it might be there. It may have been the practice of ancient scribes to omit a letter. You see where I am? To omit a letter at the end of a word whenever the following word began with the same letter. If you go back up, just go up to Caroline, sorry I'm making you work here, but go back up You see that you see the next letter in the next word? It's an aleph. So you might have a double aleph there, and it might be a little bit confusing, right? So they wouldn't want those to be read as one word. So they made the one. There's an example of this with katzti b'chayai. There's an example of this earlier in the Torah, in the story of Rebecca, where there's two kufs, one after another. So here there are two olives, one after the other. So the scribe made one smaller just so he wouldn't get those two confused. Okay, that's one. When the scribes went to reinsert the letter back in, they had to do so in a minuscule because there was no space, right? So then, right, they would sometimes, excuse me, so I jumped the gun. So sometimes they would omit the aleph, right? There was a tradition of omitting the aleph, and then when the scribes decided to go back in, there was no space left anymore, and the aleph became made smaller because, you moved out and I moved in, and now there's no room left, okay? That's one scribal hypothetical. The second scribal hypothetical would be the small letters hint at an alternative textual tradition. This is common also with the diacritical marks that are above letters, right? That there might have been, we all think of the Torah. The Torah is a miraculously well-transmitted document from antiquity. I mean, there's unlikely that there's any other book that ages, that is aged to the time of the Torah that is as preserved as the Torah is. And yet there were we know that there were variants in the text, that's for sure, because we have traditions that say that there were, once it was finally codified, right, there's one unified text. But it's not against the idea that God gave it, it's okay. So here a scribe would put like an aleph here as a kind of as most diacritical markings are, to say, there was another textual tradition here. Maybe the textual tradition didn't have the aleph, right? Maybe the aleph was there to kind of, because there is another example we'll see in a moment of the same word without the aleph in a different story in the Torah, and it has a very different valence to it. And so maybe there was another tradition, no aleph. Okay. Seder. What's the third idea? And this is where it gets exciting. The letters were intended to serve, if you're not already excited. I'm sorry, I know that you're all very excited by all of this critical scholarship. The letters were intended to serve as a commentary, but the meaning may have been forgotten. Okay. Now, in this third model, which is again, it's almost like they're throwing up their hands, right? This is the kind of the scribal or critical. It might have some meaning making, but we have forgotten why it's there, and the meaning is obscure. But they're trying to point to something, a bigger meaning of this word, and we don't know it exactly. But that is actually an opening into the second section of the class this morning, because we made a lot of meaning out of that little aleph. I mean, that little aleph became a lot of ink is spilled for that little teeny font-sized aleph. So let's look at some of the interpretations that this little aleph might invite, and also connect it to the bigger questions about the first sentence clunkiness. Because let's connect those two things as well. Okay, why not? All right. The first explanation for the small aleph really does a lot of work on the Oel Moed business and why there needed to be a kriya first, and why there has to be a call before the speech act. And I alluded to it last night in my sermon, and this is the first source. If you look at the first source, it connects back to the story that precedes the first sentence of Vayikra. If you remember in last week's Torah portion, we had already built this. We built the sanctuary, the tabernacle, and as it's built, there's a cloud of glory, or God's kavod is malei mishkan. The whole tabernacle is full of this thing called kavod, and the Torah tells us very poignantly, "V'lo yachol Moshe lavo," and Moshe couldn't come into the sanctuary. V'lo yachol Moshe lavo, right? Ki shachan alav ha'elan, right? Source number 2a here. Moshe could not enter the tent of meeting. Right, the tent of meeting is distinctly he had already been in the tent of meeting, by the way. There were times when Moshe had already been in the tent of meeting. But the tent of meeting, which is connected obviously to the tabernacle, he couldn't enter into the same space that he had already been in. And presumably the Oel Moed is Moshe's office. That's where Moshe is supposed to go. And they finished the renovation. He had already been working in his office at various points. And now the renovation is finished, and now he can't get in. They're asking for a security pass. And he's like, wait a second. I just raised all this money. I got the people together. We chose an architect. It was a whole thing. And now we built this place. And this is my office. I mean, I knew I was gonna have an office in this place. I know it's my brother's building, but like, come on, like, V'lo yachol Moshe lavo, the Midrash points out, V'lo yachol, he couldn't enter? What do you mean he couldn't enter? Moshe is the man, as I said last night, he knows how to enter the clouds. At Mount Sinai, Moshe enters into the cloud, the people move away, and there's a dark cloud, and Moshe says, oh, I know dark clouds. He walks in, and he finds God inside. But here at the end of the book of Exodus, Moshe can't enter into the very thing that he built. And so, Abba Zoe, if that's the case, right, this is the meaning, says many of the Mefarshim. That's why God has to call out to him, Vayikra. He calls out to Moshe. Moshe is the Aleph who feels small. Moshe feels, I can't get in. There's no room for me. I'm obsolete. I'm irrelevant. Now there's a new technology that's coming over. The AI is replacing me. Aaron is the AI. Aaron Israelite is the AI. And there's no place for me. And so the Aleph comes along in the Vayikra, and God says the word Vayikra here, also the rabbis say, is a lashon chiba. It's a loving phrase. Right? The rabbis say that the word kri'ah, likro, to call, is something that only the angels do, right? V'kara zeh el zeh. They call one to the other. So here the rabbis say the first explanation of the small aleph and also the rest of the verse is, why does this unique moment require God to clunkily and weirdly say, can I speak with you? Is because Moshe decided not to pick up the phone. Moshe was off in his corner saying, nobody loves me, nobody wants me. And God comes and says, I heard you feeling down. Can I give you a call? Can I give you a call? That's like Vayikra. Can I give you a call? And then Vayidaber Adonai Elav, and then God speaks to him. Why him uniquely? Because it was only to him. God wasn't speaking in that moment the way that anybody else could hear. The rabbis brought out the way to say that the voice went directly to Moshe. It wasn't like there was nobody else on the call. It was a completely secure line. And then God says to him, I'm speaking to you from your office. Me'olmoed, because that's where you're going to be, right? I want you to come in Me'olmoed. You have to come and enter in. So that's the first, right? There's the first explanation of the Aleph, and it kind of works its way into the clunkiness of the first sentence of Leviticus. Okay? How does that land for you?
Beautiful.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know.
An oversized aleph, I think, would make more sense.
Like screaming.
Yeah, and tell them you are important.
Right.
But still, yeah, it's nice.
Okay, so Moshe, can you yell at somebody like that when you call them? Maybe Vayidaber is like loud, but first he has to be like, have you ever see somebody who feels rejected and you walk over and you go, you are so important to me?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe. Okay, I accept it. It's a stretch for that. I don't know. They can have different theories of how to approach somebody who feels alienated. But, okay. Anybody else? Okay, I see in the chat they're going crazy, but that's great. Let them chat away. Chat away, friends. Chat. Have a chat. Okay. Let's look at the second option here, okay? The second interpretation, which has to do with literary continuity. Now, again, this is connected to the Aleph, and it's the whole thing. Rabbeinu Bachi. So let's look at Rabbeinu Bachi's observation. He observes that this is like there's an aspect of literary function that is happening here that isn't necessarily spiritual application. But it's not strictly a scribal device. It serves in a didactic role, therefore it included here in. Okay, let's look at this teaching from Beta Bachi. He says like this: V'dad, and you should know. He says that the verse should have been written, as we said, in a less clunky way. Vayikra Adonai el Moshe, and God called to Moshe. Vayidaber elav, and spoke to him. Umashu Amar Vayikra el Moshe Stam. And why does it start with Vayikra el Moshe? Just called to Moshe. Lahorot Yavam B'Shesefer Vayikra Hu Sefer B'Fnei Atzmo. Even though the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, is its own book, we know that. Hakol Mechubar V'Davek Imasha Kosav L'Mala. Everything that comes in the Torah is connected, as we said earlier, to what came before, right? Ki Chol Torah Kula Binyan Echad V'Kesher Echad. The whole Torah is one binyan, it's one structure, one single document. Umilat Vayikra chozeret el hakavod haniskar uchvod Adonai malei et hamishkan. And the word Vayikra connects back to the word, to the one who is the kavod, the glory, right? Vayikra, who is speaking to Moshe? The kavod that was just mentioned in chapter 40 of the book of Exodus. It's the same kavod. The same glory is speaking. Uchvod Adonai malei et hamishkan, and the glory of God is speaking in Mishkan. V'akavod hakarehu hahei shali bihi baram. Here it goes nuts. So now he says that the kavod, the glory of God that is speaking to Moshe, is the hey, the little letter hey in the word behi baram. Where is that? That's in Genesis. He's connecting one small fonted letter that appears in the book of Genesis with small fonted letter that appears in the beginning of the book of Vayikra. And what's the connection? So there is a word in the beginning of in Genesis where God creates Ela Toldot Hashemayim V'Aretz Behi Baram. These are the generations of the heavens and earth when they were created, right? Behi Baram, in their being created, and the hay there is small, right? And because small little hay in the word and in their creation. The Mishkan, the tabernacle, is a recreation of heaven and earth, right? And so the tabernacle is a recreating of that word Behi Baram in their creation. And so Behi Baram and the Aleph are together connecting the story of the creation of the world and the story of the recreation of the world through the tabernacle. And the hay there, it's a big deal. The big deal is that the Behi Baram is the letters Avraham. He doesn't say this, but the letters in their creation is Avraham. Right? In the story of these are the creation of heaven and earth, which appears before Abraham appears on the scene. There's an allusion to the whole world being created in the merit of and for the sake of this man Abraham that will come along in the Midrashic tradition. And the small little letter hey there is an allusion to Abraham who will actually have a hey added to his name, right? The Avram, the Baram is the Avraham. And this little aleph here also, in the creation of the tabernacle, is meant to center that the heavens and the earth were created for the sake of humanity and for the humans that would eventually come along and sanctify it. That's what he's saying. Like the letter aleph here, it's very strange. It connects to the kavod, but what is God's glory? God's glory is that the tabernacle was not created for God, but for human beings, the way the world was created for humans too. And that this kind of androcentric approach is to say that human beings can come along and make the world's creation into a worthy, like it was worth it for this one person. God says for someone like Avraham to come along and make the creation of the world a good thing. For someone to come along and take the tabernacle and to lift up, let's use religion. Many people come along and embarrass religion. God says, no, I didn't make religion for this person. But for someone who will come along who has a little aleph like this, like a Moshe, then okay, then tabernacle is for that kind of person. Right? So that's like the Ben Abachia.
Are these the only two small OTO?
No.
What if you put all the small ones together? Does it spell like a Torah code?
Yeah, because that would be interesting thing to do. That would be interesting.
It smells like
It's like the Da Vinci Code or something. All right, let's keep going because I want to get to the Hasidic Torah, which usually always comes at the end and usually is the most fun Torah to look at. But let's move through this quickly to get to some of the Midrashic ink on this, because remember, the Midrash is really the Ikar, like the essence of this Aleph, and this is to focus on something meaningful, like those two little points, right? So we have 2 points, one being that it's to remind us that when someone is small, God comes to whisper to them and say, I'm not rejecting you, there's a place here for you. And the second one here is to remind us that the purpose of the creation of any religious structure, like the creation of the world, is for what will be done within it to make it sacred, to make it holy. Okay, third option. This connects to the idea that the word that is present without the letter Aleph is very different than the word that is present with the letter Aleph. The word that is without the letter Aleph would be Vikar, the letters Vav, Yud, Kuf, Reish, right? Vikar, or Vayikra. Like, so the little Aleph there is now a distinction between being spoken to with the word vikar or vaikra. What's the difference between the two? Remember I said that there is an example of someone being called not with a call but with Vayikar. So Vayikar is in the book of Numbers, chapter 23, when God comes to Bilam. You see that verse? We're in C now. You see letter C, right? Intentionality versus coincidence, right? Vayikar Elohim el Bilam, and God happened to Bilam. And if you speak Hebrew and someone says to you, Ma koreh, how's it going? Ma koreh means what's happening. Koreh is a mikra, like a mikra is like, is it happening? So in the Bilam story, Bilam is of course the non-Jewish prophet who is paid ransom, he was a hired hand to come and curse the Jewish people, right? By Balak, the king of, right? So the Torah goes out of its way to say that God happened to Bilam. Now Bilam was a prophet, right? He received God's direct communication, but the Torah says that God didn't call to him, God happened to him. So the rabbis want to make this into a big deal because the rabbis want to say that Bilam and Moshe are like, they're alike, but in different sides of the holiness coin, right? Right? Moshe's on one side of the holiness coin and Bilam is on the other side. And so they want to make a distinction between how God appears to Bilam and how God appears to Moshe. And so for that reason, there's a little aleph at the end of Vayikar. It might have been Vayikar, but then someone came along and said, I'm going to put an aleph here to make sure that you know that God, when God speaks to Moshe, it's not the same way he was speaking to Bilam. But Bilam, it was Vayikar. It's just like, it happened, it was like a happenstance. It was a coincidence. But with Moshe, there's intentionality. And so that little aleph there is to distinguish between anybody that would be on Bilam's team and anybody be on Moshe's team, okay? Now, if you look at source number, like the source in C from Vayikra Abba, Ma bein Nevi'ei Yisrael leNevi'ei Umot Olam, Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina, Rabbi Yitzchak Dikfar Mandi, Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina Amar Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Nigla El Amus HaOlam Ela B'Chatzi Dibur. Like, God appears to the nations of the world's prophets only with a half a speech act, a partial act, right? Vayikar. Aval Nevi'ei Yisrael, but B'Dibur Shalom Shenei Vayikra Moshe. But when it comes to, the prophets of Israel, God speaks in complete sentences in speech, and that's why it says Vayikra. Right, God, there had to be some linguistic way to distinguish between the non-Jewish prophets and the Jewish prophets. Said here in the West End Presbyterian Church on this day, March 21st, 2006. Okay, so this is kind of like, we'll put this in the category of, it's definitely nourishing Torah because you don't have to make it about non-Jews and Jews. You can say very simply that one of the differences between a sense of a coincidence and something a little bit more direct, or something that happens to us versus something that we feel was directed towards us, is really important. It's the difference between something that's chaotic and something that's ordered. Like often we look back in our experience, we can often feel something is only a mikra, it's only a happenstance. But when we look back, that's why the letter aleph is at the end of the word. When we look back on it, we see God was there. That going forwards through the word, it's Vayikar. It's like, oh, I'm not sure. Is this really what God is? Like, this seems like a pure coincidence, or not even a coincidence. It's like, random. And then we look back at the word or at our lives, and we see a little aleph was there, like the footsteps poem. Right? God was, right? We were walking there, and he's like, where are you, God? Where are you, God? And you look back, like, oh, aleph. Aleph was there. Mm-hmm. Aleph meaning God. And that's why I've seen many sources use this decidedly. I don't know, it's a decidedly, a triumphalist midrash about the difference between Jews and non-Jews, and one can say it's the difference between two states of mind. Often two states of mind it makes complete sense that when you're going through something, you think, this is really not from God, this is weird, or it's not, I can't see the pattern in this, I can't see how this makes any sense. But then once you pass the word vikar, you look back and you see that little aleph at the end of it, as it were. It's like, oh, there was God's, stamp. And aleph often will be an example in our tradition of the one. Aleph being the first letter, aleph being the aluf is God. It's like, oh, I don't see a big aleph. It's like, it's not screaming at me, God was here. But it's a little aleph. It's a little aleph that you look back and say, okay, I can see a little bit of the divine plan there. I don't want to say it's, such a big divine plan. It's not so obvious to me. It's not an aleph rabati. It's not a big aleph, but it's a little aleph. Okay. Let's look at this next source, which I love also, which is in the Baal HaTurim, is also an early source. And it moves into Moshe's character and how the Aleph represents a certain conversation between God and Moshe. And it's related to the Aleph of the Bilam story, but it's a little bit different. So look at the bottom of the page, page 3. Do you see it? Aleph. Yeah, sure.
Sorry, good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, Ben.
I wanted to bring in just a super quick comparison with Japanese, because in Japanese they have this prefix O, which is also a single letter, actually looks kind of similar to an aleph, when you have something particularly respected or exalted in the society. And so, but it's often applied to things, not just to people. So you have like O sushi, O kane, even though it's not written that way.
Otani.
Right. So like, you know, I just think it's sort of interesting as a comparative touch point,
Yeah.
where it's thinking, where there's like this kind of cultural consensus that this is something super important to us.
Mhm.
And that's where the O comes from.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of this implicit, like, this is something that is so universally respected
Right.
that we're going to...
It's almost like the hey, it was called the hey Yidiyah, like
Yeah.
the definite article of the hey, like the known thing, or the ha-ish, or ha-davar, right? So,
Yeah.
oh, I like it.
Yes.
Oh,
But it's
Go ahead.
interesting that here there's like that it's not universal, right? That we're talking about like, oh, right here we're going to have a little aleph. We're not sure. Yeah, it's not like universally like we're always going to put an aleph before whatever, before
Yeah,
Vayikra.
sure.
So I think that's interesting. It's like kind of a
they're not sure.
juxtaposition with something where you are sure.
Right. There's a lot of it, like the small aleph here just invites this kind of ambivalence or ambiguity. It's really an ambiguous aleph. And maybe it's also the ambiguity of the whole book itself, which is like how to relate to a book that's going to be basically, at one point, you know, for the most part, irrelevant. The whole book of Leviticus is in some sense obsolete. It's obsolete, and it's like, you know, and so they're wondering, you know, what to do with it. And especially in the Midrashic mind, there's a lot you have to do to make hay or aleph out of Vayikra. It's a very complicated post-exilic book. Like when the temple is no longer relevant and the rabbis are now looking back at the entire book, which is dedicated to a practice that no longer is extant and no longer practiced. It's like, okay, this is the ultimate Midrashic challenge. This is the ultimate Midrashic challenge. And the aleph here represents a kind of Midrashic ambivalence, which is, are we allowed to go back at a text which is unambiguously clear about what its work is, and now make it into something that it was originally intended? Like, what's the intention here? And so you're right. It's not O in that way. It's not O positive. It's O negative. It's like not sure what it wants to be. So let's look at the Baal HaTurim here, who says Aleph de Vayikra ze'era shemoshe l'ratzah lichtov vayikar. So here he adds a little piece to the whole Bilam story. Guess who didn't want the Aleph there to signal his superiority from Bilam? Moshe. Moshe's like, I don't want to be any. Stop! Enough with making me into the greatest prophet. I'm just like Bilam. We can both be the same Vayikar, right? There's a tradition that says that Moshe says to God, right? Moshe says, I also want people to think that you just happen to belong to me, that we don't have such a direct connection. But what does God say to Moshe? No way. Fine. Then I'll make it into a small aleph. And the small aleph is the concession that God advocates. Moshe's like, I'm not a press hog. I'm not like, I don't want all the press. I don't want you to make the big stink about me, my introduction. Moshe is the great, look, he has a PhD from here. He's, you know, he's better than Bilam. And Moshe says, no, thank you. Just write Vayikar El Moshe. And God says, no. You're better than Bilam. I'm going to give you an aleph. And so then God says, fine. I'll make it small. Like it's like, you know, like you get up and they start to give you your introduction, Rabbi, and you're like, just do the small intro, okay? The one where, like, you know. So Moshe Rabbeinu was like, I want it. And so this actually represents Moshe's anava. Moshe is right. If you look at the next source on page 4, right? Right? And so God, actually in this, God says to him, make it with, you know, written with an aleph. And Moshe decided, whether Moshe decides, right, and out of humility, Moshe makes it small. In other words, Moshe took the matters into his own hands. God said, put the aleph there. I love you. We have a special relationship. Don't be embarrassed. And Moshe says, "Meh." And it's interesting not to imagine that Moshe decided on his own to put a little aleph there. Okay. Now this becomes a lot of beautiful Torah from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Look at this. Va'ish Moshe anav me'od mikol adam asher al pnei adama. And Moshe is the most humble person from all of the humans that are on the earth. Right? And this bottom text on the bottom of page 4 is all from the Likutei Sichos, from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Zechuso Yagein Aleinu, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He called to Moshe, the aleph of the word for he called, the very first word in the book of Leviticus, is written smaller than usual, alluding to Moshe's humility, even in the face of his own greatness and his selection by God for his exalted role in human history. In contrast, the aleph in Adam's name, as the first word of the book of Chronicles, is written larger than usual, alluding to Adam's self-esteem as the acme of God's creation. If you turn the page, it's a lot of page turning, you'll see from the Cervera Bible manuscript from the 1300s, from the end of the 13th century, beginning of the 14th century, you see that big aleph over there? It says Adam, Shes, Enosh. This is in the book of Chronicles, where we're hearing about, right, the genealogy of humanity. So there, probably the Aleph Rabati, the great Aleph of Adam. The Adam here, the great Adam, is probably just a scribal way to begin a book. It's quite common in the beginning of a chapter to have it. You have it in English too, by the way. The typesetting will be large, but they read this large aleph as an example of Adam, the first human being, the only human around. So he thought himself a big machra. I'm the only guy. I'm the man, literally. There's no one else. There's like the man. I'm the man. There's no one else. But that great Adam stature is contrasted with Moshe's little aleph, right? The big aleph and the little aleph, right? The big aleph of Adam's self-esteem is, lead to something, and Moshe rectifies that. Although it's both necessary and good to be aware of one's positive qualities, Adam allowed his self-esteem to degenerate into conceit, and this caused his downfall. Moshe rectifies Adam's mistake. Moshe does a tikkun on the chet of Adam HaRishon. He recognized his greatness, but nevertheless remained humble. His humility was not self-delusional, but the result of simple reasoning. I cannot take any credit for any of the gifts or my accomplishments, he thought, since they're all God-given. Indeed, were another person who had been given my potentials, he would have accomplished more and climbed greater heights than I have. He understood that true humility does not mean denigrating oneself, but seeing the virtue in others. This is what my Rebbe Rav Zalman often called this, not self-nullification, but self-transparency. This is kind of a deep meditation on. It's really a deep meditation on free choice and on determinism to some extent. Like, with all of the things that I've been given, of course, it makes sense that I would be who I am, right? He's not taking credit for what he's done, right? He kind of sees the true nature of the quote-unquote self with a lowercase or uppercase s, right? He understood that true humility does not mean denigrating himself. We are all spiritual heirs of both Adam and Moses. When we feel inadequate, we must remember that we are Adam with the big aleph. So now he turns this into that famous two little notes in your pocket, right? In one pocket you have, for me the whole world was created, and in the other pocket, Anochi afar va'efa. I'm just, dust and, I'm just dust in the wind, right? To quote, Kansas. So there I am, the two olives of Kansas. The first olive is, right, I'm small, and the second olive of Kansas is I'm big. I'm dust and wind, but I'm bigger.
Rabbi,
right?
did you really see Adam as conceited or kind of immature and underdeveloped in a certain way?
I don't know. I'm just reading the Rabbi's words. He sees him as at least as some version of deceit, but it could be immature and underdeveloped. That's also a nice way to talk about deceitful people.
Oh, it is.
Or conceited people. And which it's a very, some would see it as condescending, but it might also be very, very loving and compassionate to see it in that way. Listen, once you grow into your full maturity, you'll lose this need to be bigger than you really are, right? And that's kind of a compensatory thing, right? You're just trying to be, because it's just, you're inadequate. We know what inadequacy with power and combined with power can lead to. It's, we're seeing right now, and we've seen it for the last decade. So, but when thoughts of who am I deter us from our task, mi anochi, we must recall that we are Adam, formed by God's own hands and fully capable of caring for God's garden. At the same time, we must recall that we are Moses, and are thereby, just to think, to quote Moshe, the greatest prophet of our tradition, as a source for your remembering to be humble is amazing. It's like, oh, even Moshe Right, Moshe is the most accomplished person we know, but he wanted to be a small olive. That we too will merit to be called by God, and this revelation will provide us with the strength to answer God's call, drawing ourselves in the world at large closer to God. This is the true essence, right, of the sacrifices whose laws were introduced by the lesson of the small olive. The point of the small olive is to point in the direction of humility and a desire to come close. And all of this can be found, if you turn the page, in the Zohar. The Zohar is where the Rebbe is taking this from. On page 6, look at page 6. This is from the 13th century, the Zohar. On Parshat Mitzorah, Rabbi Yitzchak Patach, Rabbi Isaac opened up his conversation. He said, Vayikra al Moshe, Vayidaber Adonai elav me'ol moed lemor. He quotes the verse that we began our morning with, the first verse of Vayikra. Vayikra Aleph Ze'era. Vayikra has a small olive. Already they're contending with this, right? In the 13th century, it's a big deal. Amai, why? Ela begin de achza manhu hahu dikra. It is, why is it a small olive? The one who dwells in the sanctuary, the Shekhinah, represented by the small letters, is the one who called. And invite Moshe as one invites a guest. The Shekhinah, the same Shekhinah that is in the letter Hey, the small Hey in Genesis, you can hear the Balaturim here. And the Aleph, which is like the Shekhinah, is always small. Why is the Shekhinah, the divine presence, always small? Because the Shekhinah is the most humble of the divine attributes, because it's the most connected to incarnation, to the world. It makes itself small enough to fit into every atom, and atom with a lower atom with a T. Atom with every atom, every element, every molecule has Shekhinah in it. So the Shekhinah is not too haughty to fit into the small one bedroom that you have, or your studio, or your closet, or your, like the Shekhinah says, oh, I want to live in that small space. And so the small letters, represent the willingness of the Shekhinah to do tzimtzum, the willingness of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, to get really, really small, and then call to you from that small place. Yeah?
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That's
The
beautiful.
Zohar. The Zohar that humility, the humility of the divine presence is that it calls to you from right, the one who's small, the one who's the youngest, right? David HaMelech is the youngest, the smallest amongst you, right? In the lowest place. When you're in your lowest place, the Shekhinah says, I'm with you there also. So the Shekhinah is, the Shekhinah appears at the end of the word, because it would be the last place you look. It's the end of the word. It's after all of the fanfare, after the first four letters say, Vav, Yud, Kuf, Resh, and then the Aleph comes along and says, hi, the Shekhinah, right? Humble, right? The humble, and that's not the Aleph at the beginning of the word Adam, right? The Adam begins with Aleph. It starts, I, Ani,
That's like Monkey King in China. That's the first being in the tail of monkey.
And so I take your word for it. And so this is why the Zohar says he called and invited Moshe as one invites a guest. Right? The Shekhinah is already living there. He says, come in. Here with the small olive, another verse, Adam, and then the Zohar is the one that quotes the Adam. A big olive for Adam was the completion of all creation. So here the Zohar reads Adam a little bit differently than the Rebbe was reading it. Like he's the completion of creation. He sees the olive of Adam not as the beginning of the word, but as the end of creation. But okay, but we're going to stick with what the Rebbe was saying, that it's, it was a big olive and not a small one. And that leads us into Hasidic Torah for the last 15 minutes, okay? A little Hasidic Torah. Okay, I want to look at the Mor Einayim. Look at the Mor Einayim, which is you know what?
It's on page 8.
I know. Before we go there, I really feel like I wanted to show you the Rav Nachman of Breslev also.
Good.
Okay, let's take a deep breath. Exhale. Oh, a lot of Torah. It's beautiful. Beautiful Torah. I know. One second, Wendy. I'm looking for something.
7 to 8.
I know. It's on page 78, but I want to see. You know what? We'll come back to this maybe. It's about the beauty of why. It underscores why there's a custom, as I pointed to last night, that all children in the pedagogy, school children, the first thing they learn is they start with Vayikra. So he kind of has a Torah as to why would we start there? I mean, the rabbis also pointed out, but he gets into a deeper place of it. We're going to go to the Mori 9, which is on page,
The bottom of 8.
the bottom of page 8 into page 9 and 10. And Wendy, go ahead.
I have a question. The question is, in the Torah, all the time when it says God spoke to Moses, do you think it's God as a complete entity of all the Sphirot spoke to Moses? Or do you think that it was the Shekhinah of God that spoke to Moses?
Maybe
Only
that's
that-
a small olive.
Only that one aspect.
I think it's complicated. I think that
Great
if you're within, it's a great question. If you're in the world of the Zohar, it'll depend moment to moment. There are times when it's the full, what's called the Koma Shlema, it's the full array of the Sfirot, and sometimes it's not. It all depends on, you have to be within the system. I can't answer that. I wouldn't say that every instance is the full. But now you're asking a question that not everybody can track, which is that there's an idea that's from the Zohar which sees divine communication and divine names in the Torah not as the full personhood of the divine, but divided into 10 sfirot, different energies, and depending on the context of the verse, it reads the whole Torah as a conversation between those energies. It's not always at the level at which the story or the narrative is happening, it's happening at a level beneath it, at the level of the sfirot, and so you're asking about a specific kind of intention around that. Let's go to the Chassidus from the Mori 9, Menachem Nochem of Chernobyl, the great dynasty of the Chernobyl dynasty that later becomes the Tversky dynasty and Dinov and other places. So we have Menachem Nochem of Chernobyl. Now he reads this in a very beautiful way. So I'm going to read it in the Hebrew, and then you guys can follow along if you want in page 9 in the translation. Vayikral Moshe, Vayidaber Adonai Elav Me'ol Moed. He asked the same question that we've been asking. V'yesh lahavin, shemitchila he can ask the same question. Why does it begin with Vayikra? V'lo pirish mikara. It doesn't say who called him. V'achar kach Vayidaber Adonai Elav. And then all the questions that we've been working with thus far for the last hour or so. Vayidaber Adonai Elav. God spoke. Here, let me explain to you the matter. Right? The idea is as follows. That God, the blessed source, took us out of Egypt and then gave us right away and gave us right away the mitzvah of the Paschal offering in chapter 12 and Milah, right, in chapter 12 of the book of Exodus, and circumcision. He's going through all the different things that happened, right? And then afterwards took us through the desert and with the cloud by day and with the Amud Eish Balayla and the pillar of fire at night. And gave us the Torah. This is like the Dayenu, right? This is just like the Dayenu song in the Pesach Haggadah, right? All the different stages of God's generous benevolence. And then he told us to make a tabernacle, to make for me a tabernacle I will dwell within you. And within them, but no, within you. Kemashal, what is the parable? A person who is living in darkness their whole life. And never saw light. The light of day. If you took him right away into the light of day, that person would not be able to withstand the intensity of that light. It would harm them. And so he says you have to begin to show in sequentially, gradually show that person a little bit of light by making a crack, a little crack. That little crack we talked about where the light gets in, but do it intentionally. Make a small crack. From there you see a little bit of light. And after that you can expand that little crack until you have a window. And then you can take them out. Right? You have to have what's decompression or desensitization. Like you have the person comes from the atmosphere, they have to take time to readjust to the atmosphere. Right? He said that's the parable. right? The same thing with Israel. Israel, there's a tradition that in the land of Egypt we were in like 50 gates of impurity. In other words, we were alienated from ourselves, alienated from who we were. We were lacking, right? Lacking holiness to some degree. We weren't free. If God would have come out and said like, ta-da, here I am, right? It would have been too much. It would have been overwhelming to them. Like with maybe, sometimes I think that when the brothers came back and told Jacob that Joseph was alive and he had a heart attack, I was like, really? That was not smart. Like, maybe we should have like, some crumbs, something, I don't know, look at this, what do you think? Like right away they said like, Joseph's alive, Yafag Libo, and his heart is like, I can't breathe, right? That's why all of these different things happen in such painstaking, slow, one thing after another. The whole point was to get to the tabernacle. Behold, he said, our rabbis taught, so there's a teaching in the Talmud that says, we have 18 blessings that we say every day. It's called the Shemona Esrei, or it's the 18 blessings, Amidah. But if you're walking in a dangerous place, you have a small, abridged version. You don't do the long version, you do the small one. If there's a danger, you can shorten it in order to be able to finish it, right? So now he wants to say there's something connected here, right? So he says, Husha Borei Baruch Hu mitzumtzam etzel kol echad miYisrael afilu etzel Rasha Gadol yesh etzel adayin haborei barach. This is amazing. He says that everybody, every Jew, every human has an element of the divine for them, including the evil ones, even the ones who are completely ignorant and walking in darkness. But God will make in other words, that's the danger. In other words, God is willing to shorten, and by here he means shortening, not just the prayer, it means to make smaller. Right? The same way you're in a dangerous place, you have to have a long prayer, a big prayer, you have to make it small, because otherwise it's too dangerous, you're not going to finish it. Now he's saying, take that analogy and say in life itself. Like sometimes you get God in the big, long prayer of God, as it were. It's like long, ecstatic, clear, right? But sometimes if you're in danger, and there's, as it were, because of your ignorance, because of your darkness, because of your lack of seeing, God says, okay, I'm going to make myself small enough so you can see me, so you can handle it. I'm not going to overwhelm you. I'm going to be like, I'll titrate God, to titrate God's self to where you are. Right? That's the meaning of the word Shaddai, that God is like the breast of the mother that doesn't overwhelm the child's capacity to drink the milk and gives it just a little bit. Shaddai. So he says this is the same thing with God. He says God comes to you in the dark place and doesn't overwhelm you and gives you just enough to keep you going. And it says like this, he says every evil person also has thoughts of becoming a better person. I don't know if that's true. Maybe. Pangs of guilt or thoughts, maybe I wish I was a better person. Right? You have to
Just
go.
their suffering is some kind of
Right?
prayerful.
You have to notice it.
Right, something. Right? Now, I think in English you'd be a little bit lower down where it says, and the Gemara explains, even at the moment when they are turning towards sin, their needs should be revealed before you. Right? That's good. Right? The meaning is that the Creator, blessed be He, is constricted or contracted and present with every single Jew, even with the great sinner. The proof is that even the wicked are visited by thoughts of repentance. That's what he says. So those are that's God in thought form. God, that's the little aleph, right? What are these thoughts? They're the Holy One himself calling out to the person saying, return to me. That's what he's saying. It's like, return to me, come. Right? Right? He says, so why does Moshe need this? Right? Why does Moshe need that? He says that's the little aleph that comes at the end of the word Vayikra. Is the little aleph is the contracted divine coming and saying, "Return to me." Right? The Korat the Shuv, the Hainu, he says, "Come back, come back." Right? Shu alufo shel olam hu mitzumtzam etzel kol echad miYisrael v'koros el Shuv, the Hainu hirei tshuva shebaim lo rak mipnei she'eino mevin. But the person doesn't know, she said, Koreo so Hashem is Barach. L'chen ksiva yikra stam. Aval k'shemavin, she said, Koreo so Hashem is Barach, l'shubi darkara, u'meshivat smel l'baris Barach, az achar kach vayidaber Adonai elav. Now he explains the rest of it. He says, He says that God calls out. That's the little aleph of Vayikra. Vayikra Moshe called him. He said, and now it makes sense because Moshe felt that he was outside of the tent. Remember the way we started? Moshe felt, I'm alienated. I'm outside, and God gives him that little aleph, a little thought, and says, you know what? Time to come home. Time to come back. Vayikra Moshe called to him. And once the person realizes that it's God inside of the thought, or it's the divine saying, I'm here in every little atom, in every little moment, then God says, oh, now I opened it. I opened up with a little crack, and now I'll give you the full-on conversation. And now God says, oh, let's talk.
Nice.
So that the whole verse is basically the first little fragment is that whispered, like little olive, where God says, I'll come and meet you where you are. You're on the mountain, I'll meet you there. You're in depression, I'll meet you there. You're sad, I'll meet you there. You feel rejected, I'll meet you there. You feel unloved, I'll meet you there. It's a little olive. I'll make myself just the right size to fit into what your life circumstances are. And then the minute that happens, you feel, okay, I hear you, God. Then if we turn to it, if we really hear it, he's saying, then we can then hear a fuller conversation. Right? May all moed, from the tent of meeting. Right? And that's the reason why it says from the tent of meeting. Right? Because the tent of meeting is that place, when he comes, right, God says that God will scream out even from that place. We can keep going in the English and forget about the Hebrew, just go to the English for a second. So realize that it's taking too long to go back and forth. Right? Right? Then it says, and Hashem spoke to him from the tent of meeting, meaning when a person comes to commit a sin and the Holy One prevents them through some circumstance from being able to carry it out, then it's as if God's speaking directly and saying, return to me, how long will you continue after emptiness? So in other words, even the tent of meeting here becomes a place where God says, I'm going to stop you now, I'm going to step in so that you don't wind up. I'm screaming at you. I'm screaming at you now, because now you heard my voice a little bit, now I'm screaming at you, don't do this. Or stay away from that. Or come back. All right. That's the morning 9. We'll open it up. We have, I'm sure, I hope a couple of, if there's anybody in the synagogue that wants to say something on the little aleph that could, and the little aleph that should, and the little aleph that did, and the O, and the Otani, and the O Sushi, and the O Moshe, and the Ohel Moed, and the Ohel. Okay. Yes. Tony. The tiger.
For God to be in every little bitty little thing does potentially and even actually transform our whole relation to space and time. Because if he, she, it is everywhere, then where are we? It becomes, it really reorients us in terms of space and time, I think.
Right, so then the aleph of Vayikra there would also mean that the collapse of the subject-object dualism of God calling out to Moshe, God and Moshe are not two.
Yep.
And then the call is, the reason why the aleph there becomes small is that in that awareness, right, then it collapses, the whole sentence collapses on itself. That Moshe is not being spoken to, but it's spoken from within Moshe. And from within, like it's all, it's kind of this.
The Lord our God, the Lord
yeah,
is
it's
one.
like this very beautiful. And then Vayidaber Adonai Elav, it's God speaking to him is not to him, but me'elav, from within him.
Yeah.
Right? So then it becomes really beautiful because, and that is why Vayikra begins that way, because the whole book is about this kind of relationship to God and worship of God and source. And now in the rabbinic gloss it becomes, as the Morinayim was saying, like, wherever you go, you are the sanctuary. You are the locus of the holy. It's not about some temple. It's not even about a Moshe. Because Moshe is inside all of us, as the Zohar says. Mm-hmm. And so the whole first verse is not about a temple that once was, but a temple that is already and always was, right? So then it becomes non-dual.
But it's also like God's within Moshe, but Moshe's within God. Like we're kind of both within each other, right?
Like we're mutually
living.
Interpenetrating, as I would say, like in the Buddhist texts. We interpenetrate, like there
we're
is
we're a part of each other.
It's like a saturation point.
Yeah.
Like Kra is like about divine human saturation, like a sponge, right? It's beautiful.
It's a good thing to remember when you're feeling disconnected.
Alan, I know it's a great thing to try to remember.
Just a quick question.
Alan, go ahead, yeah.
Do any of the Meforshim play with the word yakar as valuable, as precious?
I always think that, like, Yehudim ha'orah v'simcha v'sasan vikar came together. It's the same letters from that's from the Book of Esther. I think I've seen, but I didn't bring it. It's like it would be exhausting. But like I've seen, like yakar. There's like, you know that it says with Nadav and Avihu, right? It's yakar min Adonai hamavtav chasidav. Like there's something precious here, right? Vikar is precious. Yeah, but I didn't bring it. But it's nice. It's something to play with. What do you think?
And then the small aleph is just, you could take it two ways. He's calling Moshe his precious, or he's calling out to him.
I like it. Vikar. So Alan is asking a great question. The word vikar, right? We were playing off of the olive, like the olive's like Letterman from what was it from Zoom, or was it Zuma, whatever. I think it's letter, and so I take this letter and I turn Vayikar into Vayikra. But if you don't have the letter, the four letters that are remaining appeared in the Bilam story as Vayikari happened to him. But there's another way those four letters could also be read, which is Vikar, which is Yakar is something precious, something very pristine and precious. And so Alan was asking, we didn't go down that track midrashically. What would it look like if instead of the Bilam analogy, it was the precious, not the coincidence, happenstance, chaotic, occurrence, but something more precious, and that would. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful
And perhaps to
vein.
assuage Moshe from
Feeling rejected and like, no, you're my
being
precious.
not groomed in
Not the precious like from the Lord of Rings precious.
No.
More precious like, dear and
Less
and-
graspably.
Yes, a
precious.
little bit, yeah. Okay, Adel.
Yes,
Smasting.
what,